8 серпня 2014 року.
I arrived at the town of Mnohopillya with the required communications tools on August 8, 2014. This was the reference point for the storm on Ilovaisk. Part of my task was to organise communications between the subunits that were involved in our unit. On the right flank, there were our unit's checkpoints.
На правому фланзі блокпости нашої частини, мінометна батарея і та бронегрупа,
A mortar battery and a group which went out to storm Ilovaisk on a daily basis. These were the main subunits I communicated with and managed.
І управління. Продовж з 8-го...
The attacks to regain Ilovaisk began on August 8th and happened daily. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful to begin with.
Щоденно, але, на жаль, спочатку вони були безуспішні.
Later on, I could be mistaken on the date, but somewhere around August 18th, when the Donbas battalion arrived,
Коли прибув батальйон Донбас, їм вдалося
they were able to change the situation, and our units, and the National Guard, and the Interior Ministry units,
підрозділи Національної гвардії та Міністерства внутрішніх справ змогли пробитися до Іловайська і
which were already there, were able to break through to Ilovaisk and take territory there, up to the train station. The railroad there separates the city in half.
Полотно там розподіляє місто на половину.
On August 24th, a massive artillery strike was carried out in our direction on the town of Mnohopillya. If we had felt the impact from artillery before, it was insignificant and hit and miss. We were used to mine explosions, so we did not lie down or fall. The 24th, however, was a massive attack, and I felt that personally. We incurred great loss that day. And from that point, from August 24th, the situation around Ilovaisk had worsened. At the start of the operations in Ilovaisk, at the start of August, there was a strong boost of fighting spirit among the soldiers. We looked at the reports and thought that the fighting would end. We knew that we were moving forward fairly successfully. We didn't feel as though there was any significant resistance. From August 24th onwards, we felt the impact of the artillery that was fired on us. Everyone reacted differently. Some held their positions, some dug trenches, some panicked. Everyone reacted differently. Most of the servicemen were mobilized. It's wrong to blame them for cowardice. The guys who had served before were more poised. I also want to say that the Russian soldiers who were present there broke all possible international conventions. They did not use any insignia. They used our identifying tags. During every operation, the National Guard and the Interior Ministry units agreed with one another to stick different coloured tape to their helmets or bulletproof vests or their arms, red, green and white. The Russians clearly all knew this information and also wrapped white tape around their arms. But there was one difference which we found out later. They wrapped tape around one of their legs. Therefore, they are not visible through a lens, but they identified each other amongst themselves. This is also a military trick. This is more from the local population who saw them, talked about them or sent photos. From our side, I don't think there was anyone there with some sort of death wish who stayed there and said something to the Russians, hoping that they would take them out alive. A mortar mine does not choose, it does not make a selection. We had a convoy of enemy equipment come towards us, which we fought off with the help of a Rapira MT-12 anti-tank gun. 3 Russian vehicles were destroyed then. The Russian AK-100 guns were captured. I saw that with my own eyes. The convoy turned around and left, and artillery continued to hit us. These drones appeared. I hadn't seen them before. When we opened fire on them with artillery, our attempts were stopped with fire from enemy mortar battery. But by the 29th, a convoy had formed. The military leaders took the decision to leave Ilovaisk. We already did not have enough weapons. We had lost officers. For example, we had a mortar battery which would not work without the ammunition, which could no longer be delivered at that point. And there was a lack of officers there, both the senior battery officer and the commander of the battery. We were relying on the green corridor at the start of the retreat. This was written on the internet, in the media, which our guys were reading on their mobile phones. Our leadership assured us that they were doing everything they could to get us out.
Але вже під час самого виходу
But when we started our retreat, General Komchak commanded us to come out armed. I heard all the discussions that were going on with the Russian Federation over the radio stations. Well, maybe not all, part of the talks. They kept coming up with different conditions. Once they demanded that we take a specific route, then they would say that we would need to go out without equipment. Then this turned into leaving without equipment and without weapons. Well, of course we could not leave our equipment or weapons to our enemies. The decision was taken to retreat armed. I can confirm that. Of course, not every soldier received that command to leave armed. Not every soldier was able to. Not every soldier had means of communication. The command was given via communication equipment. I heard it from my commander, Pivovarenko, and my commander also heard it from someone. On the 29th, we went to the village of Hromadske as part of the convoy and then further on to Hromadske, I think. I could be mistaken about the name. Our first car was hit. At first, when we left Mnohopillya, we walked a couple of kilometers. I personally observed the position of the Russian mercenaries. There were people who were shaved, in nice uniforms, and people in civilian clothes or something similar to military attire, and they were bearded. They already had mixed units.
Далі, просуваючись по маршруту,
as the convoy moved further along the route, it ended up in a serious ambush. The first car was destroyed, the second infantry fighting vehicle was damaged, a battle broke out, cars, buses and light armoured vehicles started spreading out. I was in a communications vehicle, a BTR-80, and it was not armed. We managed to quickly retreat through the wooded areas and ravines, and that's how we got to the village of Novokaterinivka. Just outside Novokaterinivka, something got in the way of our vehicle. Our equipment was hit by artillery fire along the whole road. I felt this from the right flank. The car was hit on the right-hand side by large and small caliber weapons. This made a noticeable sound, but this did not cause much damage to the BTR. But then something fell. There was an explosion. I can't say what was fired. It hit just at the front, where I was, and something exploded at the bottom. If it was a mine, then the BTR would have been destroyed. I would not be sat here. If it was an infantry mine, then I would not have felt it.
БТР б не було, і я б тут би не сидів. Якби була піхотна міна, я б її не відчув. Щось, я так розумію, якийсь був постріл.
I realized that it was fired from some kind of anti-tank equipment, which had bounced off the ground. Therefore, the ground took most of the impact. And then the remnants hit, and I was wounded on my left shin by the secondary fragments. The car lost control, and by inertia drove into the village, where I watched a lot of soldiers take up a circular defense position. Mortar was fired on the village.
Артилерії мінометної. Через деякий час представники місцевої влади.
After some time, representatives of the local government appealed to us to either leave the village or surrender to the Russians, because the Russians promised to attack us until all the buildings in the village were destroyed. The more courageous guys, who weren't wounded and who were carrying weapons, managed to get to the corn and sunflower fields through the ravines, rivers and canals.
Каналами їм вдалося вийти. Там більшість поранених або підірваних морально.
Most of the wounded or morally exasperated were forced to surrender. Those who could not walk, like I was at that point, were taken in a trailer towed by a car.
Від легкового автомобіля. Це була регулярна російська армія.
They were regular Russian army. This was clear from their uniform and from the dried food they gave us. They did give us food. From their practices, appearance, even the accents they had, it was clear that they weren't Russian-speaking Ukrainians. No way. They had St. Petersburg accents. There were guys there with traits of people from Chukotka region, somewhere north of the Urals. They were definitely Russian. We stayed there overnight, and 2 trucks arrived the next day carrying our wounded and prisoners. They filtered us all out. Those who were wounded were left in their positions. Those who were unharmed were sent back in the trucks. Even those who had insignificant wounds. They were taken away. It seemed as though Zaharchenko took them. And another convoy of medical vehicles came for us and took us out of the conflict zone.
Медичних автомобілів і вивезли з зони бойових дій. Чи могли ми там ще залишатися?
Could we have stayed there? Well, of course we could have, but I can't say whether we would have incurred smaller or bigger losses then. We had practically no heavy weapons, or rather, there was no ammunition. There was no spare ammunition for the infantry vehicles. 500 shots from the BMP was enough for 20 minutes of battle, and there was nothing to replenish them with.
Поповнити їх було вже нічим. На сьогоднішній день, аналізуючи, я розумію, що, мабуть, іншого варіанту.
Analysing it today, I understand that perhaps there was no other option than what happened. People look at this differently. Of course there were great losses, a lot of grief. These boys that came later, they already knew where they were going, what the consequences would be.
Усвідомлювали, куди вони йдуть, які можуть бути наслідки.